Okay, good.
So we're thinking maybe we should talk about beep 7.6, the sixth beep on the seventh day.
Yep.
And we're thinking that we're going to talk about that because it was an interesting beep, and we know how it ended.
Right.
So let me share my screen and see. So are we ready to go to beep number 6, which started at 34:34?
Yep.
Okay, number 6? Okay. So I was watching
And can you hear that clearly enough?
I can hear. Yeah.
Jimmy Kimmel, Jimmy Kimmel Live, and
This is your word, Cody. Your beep.
yeah, okay. And so I was watching that, and then I was watching physically the person he was interviewing. So like on those kind of shows, it kind of like cuts to different angles. So the angle I was looking at was the person who was talking. So it was just kind of him. Jimmy Kimmel was not on the screen. It was just the person he was interviewing. And he was talking about the new Top Gun movie. And he was talking about how, like, and so at the moment of the beep, as I was seeing this person, he was talking about how Tom Cruise can hold his breath for 8 minutes and 40 seconds. So that was, like, my experience. And I was thinking about Tom Cruise holding his breath for 8 minutes and 40 seconds.
And so at the moment of the beep, is this mostly I'm a watching TV experience, I'm watching the interview go on, or is this you said I was thinking about Tom Cruise holding his breath? And it could be both of those, neither of those, but
I was seeing the person, and he had just said about.
So I would say that you have fallen into the thinking trap. She said she was thinking about it. You have said I'm thinking about it. I think what you got to do is to erase from your consciousness any credit when somebody says I was thinking about it.
I was very well aware that she used the word thinking.
Okay.
I was very aware of the pitfall of the word thinking.
Okay, good.
But I didn't quite know what was going on. And at this point, what I wanted to know was, using her language, I wanted to figure out what exactly was in her experience at the moment of the beep. Because I took her to be saying that both of those things, which is eventually where we ended up at the end of this interview, of this sample, right? That it's both a seeing thing and a, for lack of a better word, thinking thing. Something about the idea of Tom Cruise holding his breath. And at this point in the interview, all I was trying to get a hold of was, is it both of those things? Is it one of those things? What's context? What's phenomena? Or, what's directly an experience at the moment of the beep?
So you said I was trying to use her words, and I think normal psychological interviewing encourages you to do that. That seems, people would say that's a virtue. I personally don't think it's a virtue, particularly when it comes to the word thinking. So I don't think it's a virtue, because if the person is reflecting a presupposition and you just use the word as if you were agreeing with that, then that has the vice of reifying a presupposition. It's a communication to hammer. Oh, well, you said I was thinking. Well, let's go with thinking.
Right.
And almost always, until you're sure about what the phenomenon is, you want to undermine presupposition. Well, undermine the language. So I worry about that. Put it that way.
And truthfully, actually, your comment now is this specific conversational turn, I think, is a good illustration of that, because truthfully, at the moment, I had forgotten whether, was it a good deal for me to reflect what she's saying, or should I try to, explicitly question, not that it's the only way to do it, but basically say, Amber, you said thinking, and, thinking is problematic for us, and, I don't know what you mean by that. So, could you tell me what to disagree, something like that. But I forgot.
What I would recommend is that the fewer words that you can use, the better. And it's almost always okay to start with, I don't understand, or some conveyance of, could you tell me that again? And then that gives her a chance to start over. Maybe she'll use the word thinking again, and maybe she won't. And if she does, then that gives you a little bit of confidence that it's a cognitive thing.
Yeah, it was more, I think, and even in the moment, I found myself there was something that I took her to be saying about.
So that would be perfect. If you could have just said that. Or something, you're saying something about Tom Cruise.
See, and that's a good sort of thing to know, just because I was like, that's basically where I was. I was like, I get the sense that, I'm taking her to be saying, right, there's something about Tom Cruise here. I don't know what it is. And I don't want to fault her, right? Or I don't want to get into the business of trying to undermine her in the sense of communicating, you're doing a bad job at this, Amber, right? Like, I don't want her to do that, but to say basically and ask, you said, what does that mean, right? There's something about Tom Cruise. Tell me how that's present.
So about that, I would say, if you genuinely want to know what's in Amber's experience, to the extent that that's genuine within you, and which means I want to know about Amber's experience more than I want to know about anything else. I want to know about Amber's experience more than I want to please Dr. Earlbert. I want to know about Amber's experience more than I want to get on to my next meeting. I want to know about Amber's experience more than whatever. To the extent that that's true, then you don't have to worry about offending Amber. Whatever it is that you say is going to come out as, I want to know more about your experience. And that is as deeply connected, as deeply connected as you can get. And you don't have to worry about it. So that's the advantage of cultivating the genuine interest. You have genuine interest, then you don't have to worry what your words say and whatever you can mumble around. Sort of a poor man's view of St. Augustine's love and do what you will kind of a deal. Once you have engaged in the loving aspect, then whatever comes out of you is going to be good. So I'm not trying to equate this with St. Augustine, but I think the general principle is about the same. If you're genuinely interested in Amber, then that is going to ooze out of your pores, and there's nothing you can do to stop that, which means you don't have to be verbally careful, or if you understand if you genuinely want to know what's going on there and you didn't understand it, you can say, I didn't understand it, and she will not in the slightest take that as a criticism.
My fear is always just that, and this is more hypothetically than anything else, but knowing that I would hate for my first opening turn to always be, I don't know what you said. Could you tell me more? Because but I do think in a way too that also reflects, though. That basically is the endeavor, right? I think is that people will say their sort of opening turn about this is what was going on, and more often than not, it's a first draft sort of attempt, right? And we're going to have to talk more to exactly come to an understanding of, to get a high fidelity view of what's going on there. right? And so I often, at least often always find myself going, gee, like there's something about, I feel quite confident, right? With the asterisk next to confident, right? But I get the general sense of I get the gist of what's here, but I have really no high fidelity view into what that experience was. So I'm always kind of left asking myself, or wanting to ask the question, like, I don't know what's going on. Could you tell that to me again? And I think there's more sophisticated ways of asking that question, I guess, is what I'm getting at.
I don't see anything wrong with that question. I wouldn't want you to write that down as a question. Well, I should ask this question. Always my second question should be,
Right,
I
right.
understand that because the object is for you to convey that you want to know. And if she's told you, that's clear enough. And so your antennae are all happy about what's going on, then you can cruise on. You should have an antenna. You should have an antenna about the word think, which you apparently do. And then when that antenna jangles, then you should just start over, whatever.
Fair.
So we know what happened in this interview. We know that we had a difficult time disentangling thinking from some
Emotional reaction.
Emotional reaction kind of a thing. It took us a long time, and we eventually came to think that it was somewhere between, I guess my recollection of it is that was somewhere between thinking and an emotional reaction, somewhere in here.
I think skewing slightly more towards thinking. Because actually, or slightly more towards cognitive. It's sort of, it wouldn't be right to say this was an emotion with the thought. My take of it was that this was more a thinky sort of a thing, a cognitive-y sort of a thing, with sort of a hint or a whisper of emotion in it. But it's not right to think of this as an emotion-forward sort of a experience. Which, interesting, I thought she did at least I thought she had been pretty consistent with that actually from the earlier turns of the interview. I think it became more, we explicitly talked about it and came to that understanding, after some bit of time. But I think even in the beginning, and so I'll be curious to see if it comes up here in this video, but I thought she actually was saying that from the start.
So this is why DES is interesting, why it's problematic, because I think her nonverbals say this was not thinking. This was not a cognitive event. And her verbals say it was a cognitive event. So what do you make of that? And the answer is, well, you don't really know, because it could very well be that she doesn't clearly distinguish between cognitive and emotional events, doesn't have the vocabulary, and so her experience is not differentiated in that regard. Or it could be that she is taking us, for whatever reason, to be more interested in cognitive kinds of things.
Or that it was genuinely, this was more of a cognitive sort of a thing.
Or it was a cognitive thing. But what I recall our seeing in this interview is that when she describes what's going on, it's something like, wow, he's an actor and he can do it for 8 minutes. And that is not a dry cognitive thing.
And I agree that was somewhat surprising to me, and which is why, and I asked the question, whether it was skillful or not, I don't know, but I was trying to disentangle that, because I got a flavor of, this kind of seems more like this is more than just, again, for lack of a better word, I'm thinking about this sort of dryly or analytically processing this. This is a reaction, right? Like, wow, that's shocking, that's surprising, right? And but she, again, from my recollection, was pretty clear, even from that first question of, no, this is not really an emotional sort of a thing. But I agree that I didn't quite know what to make of that. I mean, I still don't really know what to.
I don't know what to make
I don't know what to make of that.
And so I agree that verbally we ended up at, this was mostly cognitive with a little bit of wow flavor to it.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't think that that was unambiguously conveyed. And part of my worry came from what's happened here is that we're a little bit colluded into the thinking thing faster than I would have liked to have gone. And then that leaves us with well, I don't know whether she said thinking, Cody responded thinking, so we're going down the thinking path, and whether that was the best path to go down or not, I don't think we can ever know.
Mm-hmm.
You might have been absolutely right, and it was thinking, and we ended up with thinking, and that was perfect. And I, having a sort of hypersensitivity to the word thinking, I'm worried about it.
Right.
So I'm for sure not claiming omniscience in this regard.
I think that's something that definitely factors into the overall result, I guess I should say, right? In that, like, I think those things are valid factors that possibly or maybe, definitely impacted what Amber said. But again, I don't think there's a way for sure of knowing that.
Mm-hmm.
And my fear, I guess, and I mean, I don't know if this is necessarily germane to this discussion here, is that I actually 100% agree with you about the inconsistency, or the worry about, she's saying one thing, but she's behaving in another way. Like, I'm not quite sure what to make of that discrepancy. But I also worry that I don't want to get into the pitfall of, because that discrepancy there, that means that it has to be that we missed that there's some sort of mind reading involved there, right? Of like, well, I'm seeing this, and so I'm concluding like I can't, I shouldn't trust what she's saying. I think that's one possible. That's one possibility here. But at the same time, and I think she says somewhere in this interview, right, that at like now looking back on this at this moment, I mean, it is a surprising thing. She is surprised by it, but at that moment, that wasn't what was there quite yet, right? And again, whether or not that is actually true or not, I mean, it starts to me, my sensitivities around, gee, what are we doing in this process? Are we starting to mind read here? Are we being consistent about what our task is with this beep, and even consequently, talking about it now, like in grasping her phenomena? I don't know, but.
So the knot that you have described is not untiable, I think. We don't know whether we should believe her or we should not believe her or whatever, but this is in a one deal. The way the knot gets loosened, it seems to me, is the iterative process. So we're going to come to the end of this discussion, at the end of sample 7.6, and we're going to wonder whether this was a cognitive thing or whether there was an affective component to it, and we're going to say, well, we can't really resolve that. We did the best we could, and we were pretty straightforwardly honest with her. We said, look, you used some words that look this way, and when you did it, you had your facial features and your actions that look that way. We were, I thought, pretty candid about that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And she came down on the side of that being thinking. And so should we believe that? Well, I don't really know the answer to that.
Right.
But it's something that I would say we should keep in mind for the next time.
Right.
Maybe we're going to learn something about this. So there may be some something which is really sort of hard to imagine. What could happen later that will allow us to untangle this, or what will happen later that our attempt to untangle this will facilitate later on.
Yeah.
There's always two things going on, I think, in a DES interview. There's trying to figure out what's going on in this sample, and there's trying to figure out what's. And there's. And I didn't mean to say that. There's trying to figure out what's going on in this sample, and there is laying the groundwork for being better at figuring out what's going on in some future interview. And what exactly that means, I don't know. But
right.
But that is the basic philosophy of DES. It's iterative all the way down.
Yep.
All right, shall we go forward here?
Yep.
Tom Cruise can hold his breath for 8 minutes and 40 seconds. And then I was kind of thinking about that. Like, just, I don't know, that was like there. Like that idea was stuck in my brain.
It's a bull.
So is it reasonable to say that if she had a purely cognitive idea that she would look like this when she was saying it? That's the question.
And he had just said about Tom Cruise can hold his breath for 8 minutes and 40 seconds. And then I was kind of thinking about that. Like, just, I don't know, that was like there. Like that idea was stuck in my brain.
And so both of those simultaneously, right? It's not like.
What do you think? I don't think there's a yes or no answer to this question.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm thinking back to some of her earlier sampling days, right, where we can see Amber light up when we're on the money, right, when we're sort of on the scent of talking about her experience. You know, she's telling you this is the context and this is what was there. I've seen that before, and that at least is what I was picking up on is, you know, like for lack of a better way of saying it, like, okay, you know, there's something about Tom Cruise is right. There's something about Tom Cruise in her experience. But I also I agree that, I mean, it's all these little things that led me at a point in this interview to say, you know, is this really, you know, is this thinking? Is this emotional sort of reaction, right? Like, is this less a thinky thing and more like a surprise or, you know, whatever, something that's not really cognitive-y? I don't know.
So let me. Let's imagine that we can turn down the audio here. I guess we probably can turn down the audio. I'm going to turn down the audio. See whether I can. And now what I'm going to say, I'm going to speak for Amber here, and you're going to tell me. Well, I don't know whether I can do this and whether I can pull this off or not, but we'll see. Whether what I'm going to say matches what Amber.
Okay.
And I was thinking about that Tom Cruise's acting credits include Top Gun. So what I did there was I tried to make a sentence that had no affective significance. You know, everybody knows that. Like the guy on the screen had said, Tom Cruise was in Top Gun, and she was thinking, well, Tom Cruise is in Top Gun. So the question is, if she were into a factual, purely cognitive thought, would she have looked like this? That's the question that appears to me.
Just, I don't know, that was like there. Like that idea was stuck in my brain.
That idea that Tom Cruise was in, oh, I just can't do it. That Tom Cruise was in Top Gun. I can't even separate out the action. I can't separate out the action from the emphasis. That Tom Cruise isn't. I can't do it. I can't say it with a purely cognitive thing and have it look like that. So you agree with that or not? I'm not.
I agree with it. I agree with it, and I'm just concerned that I worry that I'm colluding with the presupposition that, well, you can't be excited about cognitive sort of things. You have to say it, and it's never exciting, and I'm never going to be sort of enthused by it. I agree that probability-wise, yeah, it's a pretty easy sell for me to be. I don't think this is entirely an analytical sort of thing, right? That it strikes me that there is an emotion behind what she's saying. There is something more than I'm thinking about Tom Cruise and whatever. That this is something more than that. But I also don't want to. The thing is, I feel confident about that, which is why I'm trying to be careful about, colluding with that confidence to say we missed it or.
So I think that's totally admirable and totally problematic. And I'm not sure I'm right about this one. Let's see whether I can figure out what I mean by that. So I agree that it is to. So you said, I don't want to fall into the presupposition. Correct me if I'm wrong about this, but I understood you to say, I don't want to fall into the presupposition that when people talk about purely cognitive things, they do it with a flat affect, something like that. Is that
something like that? Yeah.
Is that the gist of what you were saying?
Yeah.
And I think that's I think it's worthwhile to be concerned about that. But it also seems to me that if you go down that road, then you've got to enumerate presupposition after presupposition after presupposition. There's probably 10,000 presuppositions that we could make up about this 10 seconds worth of video. When people use their left hand, they shouldn't use their right hand. Right. We could go down all those things. And I don't think that's. I think it's possible to do that, but you end up more worried about your list of potential presuppositions than you end up worried about what Amber's trying to tell you.
And maybe this will help. This is the thought that's coming to my mind is, I know that in all these conversations, right, throughout DES, it's not desirable to come in with these harsh, strict rules or things like that, right? I mean, obviously there are things that are highly, highly, highly suggested, and there are maybe certain right or wrongs, but again, that generally I'm saying here, I think it's problematic to come in with trying to be very rigid about these sorts of things. And the conundrum that I'm left with is, I want to be confident when there's merit for me to be confident in. In other words, right, like if Amber's telling me something that is about phenomena, and if I know what that phenomena is, right, when earlier in this, I think there's a couple of beeps here, right, in this 7th sampling day where she's talking about seeing something, right? Like there's not much more to be said about that. When she's saying, I'm seeing my phone screen, I'm seeing the blue line, I'm quite confident that she's seeing the blue line and things like that. And obviously there might be, right, like in that conversation, thinking of the first beat, there's something about the exact halfwayness that is kind of there, and it's a little bit more than just seeing, but in other words, I think there is times in DES where you should lean into that confidence, right? Or, I mean, like that it's not like having confidence is a bad thing. It becomes dangerous if that confidence is something where if she's using the word thinking, I'm going down the road of it has to be cognitive, right? She said she's thinking about Tom Cruise. Well, it has to be a cognitive sort of thing. I know that to be problematic because I think this beeps a good example where if you take her to just be saying she said thinking, so it has to be cognitive. That isn't necessarily true. That's where I know I want to be careful because that thinking could mean anything really. But I'm left going, I think this is a good example of there are some times where the phenomena itself isn't clear and what to do about that.
If I knew how to say what I'm trying to say here, then I'd be smarter than I am, I guess. We'd be farther down the road. But this is sticking in my mind, so I guess I can say it. So it seems to me that it's sort of like the difference between an analog and a digital computer. And in the digital age, which is what we are in now, obviously, in the digital age, all computation is a series of yes/no questions. Is it this or this? There's a bit that's on or it's off. And the nature of that is that every bit is every bit as good as every other bit. It, on or off, yes or no, means exactly the same thing when you're in, no matter what bit it is. A bit is just a bit. It doesn't matter whether it's in this or in that. I don't think that's the way the real world is. The real world is more analog, which means it's not just yes or no. It's yes, or it's yeah, or it's probably. But there's a whole range of yeses, and there's a whole range of no's. And so is it possible that thinking means something other than a cognitive thing? Yes. Is it possible that she's saying, well, she's the kind of person who would be really emotionally attached to flat cognitive things? Well, possibly. But there's a difference between that. Right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the difference, it seems to me, the reason that this difference is important is because when you come at Amber with yeses and nos that are all equally important, then she's got to feel sliced and diced. You're going to ask yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, yes. And you're coming at her with a grid of razor blades, basically. You're going to put her into that category, and then when she's there next, you're going to put her into that category. But if you come at her from the inside out, then it's like, well, Amber is saying something, and I've heard it in a couple of different ways, and I don't have to slice Amber into one of those. Is it this way or is it that way? I can sort of figuratively put my arm around Amber and say, well, I got to figure this out with you. We gotta figure out whether And that, I guess that's putting the knives aimed at me rather than aimed at Amber. Russ, red-blooded person that I am, I've heard you say two things. One is I've heard you say, I'm thinking about this, and the other is I've seen you gesturing, which seems, and I haven't figured out, Russ hasn't figured out what you're trying to tell me yet. And that seems a whole lot different to me. I'm willing to acknowledge that I might be hypersensitive or wrong or whatever about this, but and I recognize that psychology is on the digital side. We're going to advance a hypothesis, and then we're going to check it. We're going to check it. We're going to advance another hypothesis, and then we're going to check it. We're going to get a yes or no. And psychology knows that's a bad deal, and so they say, well, you really got to think about effect size too. So you can't just say yes, you got to say yes with an effect size. And that's sort of like saying, I'm going to be digital, but I'm going to try to quantify it a little bit. I don't think that's adequate. I think it's better than just being digital, but I don't think it solves the problem. And so it's not that I'm recommending, Cody, you should trust your feelings here and just go with your feelings. I don't think that's fair because I think your feelings are screwed up. Just like I think my feelings are screwed up. I don't think we have any right to think that I don't think I have any right to think that my feelings are the right one.
It's sort of another sort of digital thing, right? Of, well, you don't do it this way, so do it this way, where it's not necessarily that dichotomous.
Right. I think I honor my feelings. Let's put it that way. I honor my feelings, which is not to say that I think they're right. It's that I think there's a difference between somebody saying thinking and as a presupposition and somebody having a sort of a very unusual, I would say, view of cognitive thing, purely cognitive thing, having a emotional overlay or whatever. And so I guess I would honor that. So my advice to you, I think, is to well, I don't know what the end of that sentence is. I think when to the extent that you're in the digital age, and by digital I mean you got this hypothesis, I'm worried about that, this hypothesis, I'm worried about that, and this hypothesis, I'm worried about that, and all those things, then I think you feel compelled to get all those out there. And I think that I don't think it's possible. And B, I don't think it's possible to get them all out there because I think for every 10 that you advance, I can think of another 10. And I don't think it's desirable because I think it overemphasizes the categorical and underestimates the human. And so I'm on a roll here. I guess sort of a longish lecture. But so I think I think this is really where DES came from. So when I was your age, or younger maybe, the world was behavioristic, which is to say categorical. And the humanists was an antidote to that. The humanists were saying trust your feelings. And I didn't think they were right about that either. So I was left in something of a quandary. I didn't think the behaviorists were right, so I thought the humanists had a legitimate criticism of that. But I didn't think the humanists were right. I thought the behaviorists had a legitimate criticism of that. There isn't any reason to believe your feelings. So the question is, well, what do you do about that? Because both of those seem to me to be pretty highly problematic. And DES was my answer to that. And whether that's an answer for anybody other than me, I don't know that I have the right answer to that. I will say that I thought pretty hard about it, and I worked at it. But that may be just idiosyncratically Russian. And, but at any rate, what DES, the aim of DES, what DES came out to be is, what can you say something that should satisfy a behaviorist about something that is human?
Mm-hmm.
And the answer to that was what I call pristine inner experience. Either that's going on or it's not. That's going to please the behaviorists, and we can try to describe it with fidelity, which involves one human being coming face to face with another human being, which ought to satisfy the humanists. Well, whether that's idiosyncratically mine, I don't really know. I still believe in it 50 years later, but with its limitations,
Mm-hmm.
when I say inner experience is what it is, it's either there or it's not or whatever. I don't really mean that with a yes absolute. I mean that. Well, there's a range of that. I think we can pretty clearly say at beep 5 or whatever it was today that Amber was seeing a mountainside with some tunnels going through it. I didn't have too much thought about that. I'm guessing that you or somebody else could come up with 100 skeptical reasons why you shouldn't believe that. And was brought into the play by the beep, or she was telling you that because she knows that you're a Hawaiian and she wants to talk about Hawaiian roads with you. And, we could gin up some reasons not to believe that, but they seem a little far afield. But then there's other ones where I think we didn't figure things out as easy, like the scooping up of the 3 words and
the reading, yeah.
Beep 3. What was that about? Was she just saying? What was the word that she was talking about?
I think it was
alternate.
Few white lies, right? I think it was.
Well, it's 3 and 4 were both interesting for more or less the same way. I was really thinking more about beep 4 when she's saying alternate. But the logic is the same in the sense that what we said about beep 3 or 4, the conclusion that I would recall us reaching anyway, was something like, verbal processing is not just the one thing. You got to access the verbal processing in a variety of different ways, and so you can get few white lies, and those can come in as words, but words without any really semantic meaning.
Right.
I think we worked at that as hard as we could, and that was the conclusion that we got. Is it really true? I don't know. That's a hard one, but it seems if you are interested in reading, the theory of reading, then it would seem to me you should want to be sitting in on one of these meetings with us and find out about what people's experience actually is. I don't think the reading people actually know. And I think the reason is that that experience is very difficult.
Well, I think it's both threatening and in some way possibly even sort of minimal. I can't think of the word, but I don't think people know what to make of that. Right? I'm thinking of like a reading theorist. I think the phenomena is really important. There's something about trying to understand what people's experience is when they're reading. I mean, that's sort of a big piece of trying to understand reading. And when the conclusion of that, right, or in understanding that, you come to a beep like Amber's one, where like, people can be reading words. It's not one, it's not like in reality, right? Obviously, you're reading one word at a time, but it comes in as a unit, but that unit is of words being words, right? There's no meaning behind it. There's no semantic meaning, but these are just words as present. That's interesting. What do I do with that? How does that inform my theories? Well, I don't know what to make of that. So right, it's sort of like in a way threatening because it's like, gee, I don't know what to make of that. So that's so clearly, right? I mean, like, gee, that's alarming in one way. Like, maybe our theories of reading are wrong, but in another sense, it's like, I don't know what to make of that. Well, I'm going to just move on. I mean, it could just be an idiosyncratic thing. Oh, this is one beeped moment out of a million, like whatever, right? That's complicated. I'm going to leave that aside and just focus on, the other stuff that I do know, which obviously probably isn't as high fidelity as the stuff that we find here, but right, they'll just move on.
Well, I think that is the dilemma, and I think it is a deep dilemma.
So
because I'm not in a position to say that reading science would be better off to contemplate these kinds of things.
Right.
Seems to me that it would be, but I don't actually know that. I don't know that for a fact. What is it? I guess it's Mar that says, I don't know that for a fact. I just believe it's true or something like that.
Yeah.
Something.
And what I will say just to your earlier point about DES is that what's interesting to me is in observing these videos after the fact, I find it striking that I am asking questions in a way where I'm going, like, why are you trying so hard to categorize this, Cody? Because I'm not necessarily, I typically am not one to think in that regard. And again, whether that's true or not, right? That could be a total presupposition. But in general, I don't at all prescribe by that mentality, thinking that there's benefit in that, generally speaking. I see dangers of that, particularly in psychology, for the reasons you outlined. And so I try to be cognizant of that. But for whatever reason, in the interview, in the moment, I'm reverting to that, right? Or I'm picking that up. And even in the moment, I feel like it's more in that spirit of, okay, there's something here about X going on, vaguely, right? Like there's something about Tom Cruise here. And that's about as far as I know, right? That's as far as I understand at this point. And so the dilemma for me is, how do I ask a question that's going to, right, like not tip the scales going towards thinking or not trying to do that? And, and I think part of that is like you're saying, I mean, I agree. In this position now, knowing how this interview ended, I'm going, hey, you're seeing that discrepancy between, how she's talking about this, right? Her expression, her body language, and the content she's saying. You should ask, hey, whoa, we've been saying this, let's slow down this thing and say, you said thinking, that's problematic. I don't know what you mean by that. Is this a reaction? Is this like an emotional reaction? Is this an analytical sort of thing? Or just ask, right? Like, hey, I don't know what you mean by all this is. Well, how is this present to you, right? And kind of just go with that. In the moment, though, right? That's something that is kind of totally like I mean, a part of me is responding to that, and I think I get there eventually. But, clearly I think I could benefit from trying to relax more into that. And again, how to do that, or exactly, I don't want to get down the road of trying to prescribe how to get there. But it's an observation that I'm noticing.
Well, I think you said it better than I have said it so far. I think, so my reaction is, Cody, can you just not try so hard? And I don't know how to tell you to do that, but I think we're seeing the same thing. You're seeing it from your side, I'm seeing it from my side. And so if I've thought a fair amount, but pretty much explicitly along those lines of trying hard. I don't know that I've used exactly those words, but something like that. When I've thought about, well, what could I do to slow Cody down or get him to not try so hard or whatever, and I don't know the answer. I haven't figured that out. If I had figured that out, I would do it. Maybe this is I would say this is as good as I've got as far as how to do it. We're going to look at some beeps and talk about them.
Can I see before you go on? Or
Sure.
That's the one. I agree, and the hard part about that to me is, or the peril in that is, I agree, and I know that in the interviews, and maybe this is just a failure of mine where I become categoristic in that way, but the words do matter quite a bit, or attending to the details there do matter quite a bit, right? In the sense that you do have to be very cued in the moment to, all the different things going on and how Amber's talking or what she's saying, what words she's using. And again, it's not so much that you need to break it down to all those different parts, right? But there is something that you have to be sort of attending to there. And that's where it's difficult for me because, I think there have been times, I don't know whether it was throughout Amber's sampling or not, where I've tried to relax into it. And I think part of the, what happened as a result of that is, it's like sort of like missing back on one of the earlier sampling days, right, where Amber's talking about something visual or something, there are some beeps like that where it's like, there's very clearly something here and I'm just sort of whizzing by it because I'm like, well, whatever. And so how to cultivate sort of a relaxed stance on it, relaxed yet sort of receptive to those details or perceptive to those things is what I'm trying to figure out. I don't think being hyper sensitive to all those details is going to get me there, but I also wonder then, what the alternative to that is.
So my guess is the first alternative to being hyper, whatever word you said, hyper attentive, is to be sloppily relaxed. And so when I'm guessing, so I think what happens sort of in general when people master some new way of being that is fairly deep for them, when they throw that off, it's pretty ugly for a while, and I think the reason for that is, well, you've structured your existence about the way you're doing it, and you're skilled at that, and now you're going to say, well, I'm not going to do that anymore. So now I'm going to go back and do this other thing, which I don't know how to do. I abandoned that when I was 5 years old or something. So you have to go back to being, I don't mean literally a 5-year-old, but you're going to go back to being not as differentiated. You're very differentiated in the trying too hard way. It's going to be hard for you to be, it's going to be painful, let's put it this way, to master being differentiated in another way.
Right.
And it's going to start out feeling sloppy somewhere. And so the dilemma for me is, I and there's something that's true about whatever it is that I say to you, whatever it is that I say to you, you're going to take on as something that you got to do. And that's going to make things more hyper. It's going to add one more layer to that. And I think that is a genuine dilemma. I don't think there's any way out of it. I can tell you what I think, and I can encourage you to believe half of what I say, or a quarter of what I say, or whatever. Figure out the rest of it for yourself.
It is a dilemma. Yeah. And I will say, I guess on my part too, is I'm trying to grow into that too, right? In the sense of, I also recognize that as well, though, right? Of, hey, Russ is a person, and he knows a thing or two about this, but I mean, what he says, it's sort of like these aren't laws, these aren't rules, like, I mean, interpret it, take it in, and hold on to that kind of loosely, or so.
So I did have a reaction to one thing you said a paragraph ago or something, which was the words are important, and I think that's true, but I think the words are most important at the end of the process. So I think part of what we're trying to do in DES is eventually figure out a way to put into words something where the words will stand up. We will use words in their Webster-defined meanings to convey to each other and to Amber and to the world about what we're talking about. At the beginning, I think the words are not to be given that credit. I think the words are to be understood as being sort of flexible tokens. And so, yeah, the words are important. Some words are more problematic than others, but Amber's expression is important too. Her way she uses those words. That's the analog portion of the deal. And our task, I think, the DES task, is to gather up Amber. Words, motions, smiles, stutters, to gather all that up and transform that with Amber's assistance into externally understandable words. And there are risks involved with that because we could be imposing our own presuppositions on that. That's my criticism of. So when I said a little bit ago that I grew up in the battleground between behaviorism and humanism, wasn't really quite true. It's between behaviorism, humanism, and psychoanalytic point of view. And the problem with the psychoanalytic point of view is I don't think that it had enough presupposition protection. And so I think the psychoanalytic interpretations are too loose from my point of view. And so DS, it was actually the triangle of that. The DS came out in the middle of it. So I don't think we want to interpret a word of what Amber says. Our job is not interpretation. Our job is to. This is what Russ as a human being got from Amber as a human being, and Russ would like that. Russ, with his idiosyncrasies and limitations and whatever, would like to structure a situation where Amber can communicate to him in a way that he can understand it, basically, with his limited skill set. and that's about something that they can agree on is real and is purely Amber, which is pristine in her experience. Have you ever seen the TV show Columbo? You know that?
No,
Columbo?
I haven't.
I'm gonna send you a link. You should watch a Columbo episode or two, and I think you can find them on YouTube or wherever. Oh,
I think he talked about it before once, maybe.
I may have. Columbo is a bumbling detective who's really smart, but he and pretty honest, but he comes across as being a doofus. Maybe that's a little too strong. You have to watch it and see. But there's something to be learned from Columbo. I think he's a caricature or character or something. But I do think there's something about that show where the object was to Columbo was legitimately trying to solve the crime, and he knew some stuff and he didn't know some stuff, and he's talking in such a way that he gets the answers that he needs to get.
I think we had talked about it. I think it was in another sort of project we're working on, but I think is one of the clips or one of the scenes, and maybe this is too specific, but he's looking at someone's suit. He's meeting with a politician and he says, he's asking questions, and it turns out he's just kind of having a conversation, but he's piecing together things throughout the answers.
Yeah.
I think we have talked about Columbo. Ultimately, is what I'm trying to say. But
yeah, I don't watch much TV, but I thought Columbo had something to say. Well, we've been at this for an hour, and I think we've probably covered what we had to cover. I don't think we should grind this too much farther than that.
Yeah, that sounds reasonable.
And I guess I would also say, while we're on this topic, is that so I had said to Amber today that I thought we were reaching the end of the line, and she wanted to know why I thought that. And I said something about that. Well, we've been doing the master classes, and sooner or later you should be able to look at those too. I didn't really amplify that, but what I meant by that is that I think there's value in these for her. And the longer we go on, the older these things are from the original experience, and B, there's the moving on. So she could be in your shoes or something. I haven't thought that through, but so far we are withholding value from her, I think.
Yeah.
And that, as in most things in the human, it's a trade-off. And I've been happy with that trade-off, but I'm growing less and less happy with that trade-off. And
I definitely think, regardless of, what the end result is of all of these videos, at a minimum, I think Amber has the right to, more than I think she should have access to these, and whether she finds it beneficial or not, I think I would want her to be able to be part of that. have access to it.
It's an interesting process. The whole thing is an interesting process.
Okay.
I guess before we go, I don't want to come across as being overly critical here. Your digital approach, as we're calling it, has value. Period. It has value. Period. I'm not discounting that. But I think it also slows you down in a lot of different ways. I'm guessing it's not just a DES. It takes you 5 years to do a master's thesis or whatever. It probably is the same.
And so I agree. And that's where I do agree. I do see, like, I know that there's no such thing as right or wrong in most things. I don't think anything is really that strong. But well, I appreciate that, but also I want to try to play with these types of things, to try something else on and see what that looks like, and
And I also don't know whether that's whether that's profitable for you. I think it's possible that you should just elaborate your digitalness and go with that. And it's also possible that you should grow your analogness, as we're calling it in this context, alongside your digital.
Which is fun. I would have thought switched, where the analog would be more on or off switch and digital would be that. But I could just be wrong about that.
Analog. Analog is about the change in voltage. The voltage goes up and then it goes back down again, and you watch the voltage go. Whereas digital is yes, no, yes, 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 no, yes.
In a computing sense, right? Because you use the words like an analog digital computer.
Yeah, there were analog computers before there were digital computers.
Right.
But the digital computers won the day. There are very few analog computers left anymore. And the reason for that is that they're hard to work with. You have to calibrate them all the time. Whatever. The beauty of the digital system is that you can make a copy of 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 a copy, and you've got the same thing as you started with. Whereas a Xerox machine, which is fundamentally analog, you make a copy of 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 a copy, and you get something that's pretty much degraded.
Mm. Well, it's a iterative process, I guess, right? You figure it out. So.
Yes, certainly is. All righty.